The mountains had not yet surrendered their darkness when the first shots cracked through the cold air, echoing off stone and ice like the snapping of giant ropes. What began as a tense standoff between a lone marksman and an unseen adversary quickly expanded into something far larger and more lethal, a chain of events that would sweep through the frozen ridgeline and pull in entire squads before the sun finished lifting over the peaks. The man at the center of those opening moments, exhausted, half-frozen, but still alert, did not yet know he was at the edge of a confrontation that would sharpen into a duel, erupt into chaos, and eventually reshape the way his unit trained its shooters. For now, all he knew was that an enemy sniper had found him, and the first bullet had landed far too close. The terrain worked both for him and against him. Jagged rocks provided cover, but they also trapped him in a narrow lane where movement meant exposure. Snow stung his face each time the wind rushed through the pass, and the valley walls funneled sound into confusing ricochets that made locating the shooter a maddening puzzle. He steadied his breathing, sinking lower behind a slab of stone, his rifle cold enough that it bit against the skin of his cheek. Somewhere across the bowl-shaped depression, the enemy waited, patient, disciplined, experienced. He replayed the near hit in his mind, tracing its angle and speed, picturing the shooter's likely hide. A handful of positions made sense, and none of them were comforting. Each spot offered a commanding view, stable footing, and enough distance that even a small mistake would be forgiven by the terrain. He shifted just enough to adjust his sight line, careful not to silhouette himself. Minutes dragged on, the silence stretched thin, and every instinct told him the next shot would come when he least expected it. Snipers understood the rhythm of anticipation. They fired not into openings, but into moments where human nature made people move. The next crack confirmed it. A chip of rock exploded inches from his shoulder. The enemy had calculated his likely repositioning perfectly. He exhaled slowly, absorbing the fear and turning it into focus. The duel had officially begun. He built a plan in layers. First, he needed to mislead the shooter, to make him commit to an angle that would reveal his location. Second, he had to force that reveal without offering his own body as the incentive. He reached into a pouch, pulled out a scrap of cloth, and tied it to a short length of broken branch. A simple decoy crew, but enough. When the wind shifted, he raised it slowly above the rock in a human-like silhouette. 2 seconds passed. 3. Then a flash, a bang, and the stick snapped in half, the cloth dancing away like a leaf. He saw the muzzle puff, a faint, almost imperceptible signal, but visible for the blink of a moment. He had him. The return shot came instinctively, but not hastily. He accounted for distance, for wind funneling through the ridge, for the slight dip where the enemy lay. His finger tightened, the rifle bucked, and a distant thud suggested contact. But he knew better than to assume the duel was over. Wounded snipers were often at their deadliest. As he scanned for movement, the mountain gave its first hint of dawn, brushing the horizon with pale blue light. That meant his window was closing. A rising sun would expose him, while giving his opponent new ways to blend into the warming landscape. It also meant his own unit might begin maneuvering, troops on patrol, unaware that an entrenched enemy sniper controlled this corridor. The duel's tension was broken not by another bullet, but by distant shouting, boots crunching through snow, gear clattering, soldiers advancing from a side route he had not expected anyone to use at this hour. They weren't from his sniper team. They were a separate element, moving toward the ridgeline unaware of the trap overhead. He called out, warning them to stay low, but the wind devoured his words. A moment later came the inevitable, a volley of gunfire from across the slope, not from the sniper, but from a second position he had not accounted for. This was no lone shooter, they were setting an ambush. He shifted position quickly, running calculations in real time. If he stayed focused on the sniper, the infantry squad would suffer. If he tried to cover them, he would reveal himself. The only viable solution was to eliminate the sniper first, breaking the overwatch that anchored the ambush. He crawled to a higher ledge, each movement a negotiation between necessity and risk. Snow slid beneath his elbows. His breath fogged the scope. He wiped it with a gloved thumb and reacquired the position where he'd seen the muzzle flash. He spotted him, injured, dragging himself deeper behind rocks, but still alive, still dangerous. Before the sniper could reset or vanish completely, he fired again. The target collapsed fully this time, motionless. The overwatch was gone. With that threat removed, he swung his attention toward the firefight below. The enemy force was larger than expected, equipped with automatic rifles and positioned in a layered formation that used the slope to create overlapping fields of fire. The friendly squad was pinned, scrambling behind boulders while bullets shredded the snow around them. He put the first enemy gunner in his crosshairs and squeezed. The man fell instantly. A second shot broke the momentum of another attacker, giving the trapped squad room to breathe and reorganize. He shifted targets with practiced rhythm. Breath, aim, fire, each shot chipping away at the ambush. As his rounds found their marks, the friendly squad rallied, returning fire with renewed precision. Within minutes the ambush collapsed, enemy fighters retreating or falling where they stood. The final echoes faded into the valley, replaced by the ragged breathing of soldiers who understood how close they had come to disaster. But the day was not finished testing them. The silence after the ambush felt strangely heavy, as if the mountain itself were absorbing the shock and holding its breath. The surviving soldiers moved cautiously, checking bodies, securing weapons, and scanning the ridgelines for any sign of reinforcements. The sniper who had anchored the enemy's overwatch lay still on the far slope, a dark shape half buried in frost. The man who had ended that duel felt no triumph, only the lingering tension of someone who knew the ridge was still full of unanswered questions. He descended from his perch carefully, boots sinking into patches of soft snow and sliding over icy crust. The squad he had saved met him with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Their leader, rattled but composed, nodded in gratitude while trying to piece together how the ambush had formed so quickly and with such precision. The sniper explained what he had seen, the first shot, the duel, the unexpected second position. The pattern made sense to him now. The enemy had set a layered trap, using the sniper as bait and backbone. Had he fallen early, the surrounded squad might not have stood a chance. But analysis would have to wait. They needed to regroup, reinforce their position, and ensure no remaining threats lingered in the shadows of the pass. The mountain could hide an entire platoon if it wanted to. Working their way uphill, the combined group searched the enemy's firing points. They found casings, packs, hastily dug fighting positions, and the footprints of multiple fighters who had retreated when the ambush collapsed. Maps recovered from one body showed a grid of marked trails, routes used to intercept patrols, observation posts, and likely withdrawal paths. The area had been contested for weeks, but this was the first detailed glimpse of how thoroughly the enemy had studied the landscape. The discovery ignited a shift in the sniper's perspective. He realized that while his accuracy and instincts had saved lives today, the battle exposed a deeper vulnerability. Too many of their shooters relied on individual experience rather than systematized training. The duel he had barely won was not just a lucky contest between two marksmen, it was a warning. The enemy had invested in skilled snipers, trained to exploit terrain, to set traps, to dictate the terms of engagements. If his own unit failed to adapt, the cost would only grow with each patrol. As the squad prepared to move back toward their forward base, he climbed one last ridge to survey the terrain from the perspective the enemy sniper had once used. The vantage point was commanding. From here, he could see the choke points, the avenues of approach, even the blind corners his unit often took for granted. Every contour of the land suddenly appeared as part of a larger puzzle, each dip and rise carrying tactical value. It struck him then, if one enemy shooter could turn this terrain into a weapon, dozens could transform the region into a graveyard. Back at base, the air buzzed with debriefs, field reports, and the dull clatter of equipment being unloaded. The sniper submitted his account, detailing the duel, the ambush, and the terrain analysis. His commanding officers listened closely, recognizing the implications. The sniper's performance had prevented a massacre, but the enemy's strategy demonstrated a sophistication that could not be ignored. Something had to change, not just in equipment or missions, but in how their shooters were trained and deployed. Word of the duel spread quickly among the teams. Snipers respected skill above all else, and the story of a near-perfect shot narrowly avoided, of a decoy used to draw fire, of calculated counterstrikes under pressure, it traveled through the unit like a spark. Younger shooters sought him out, asking how he read the terrain, how he tracked a muzzle flash in bad light, how he adjusted for wind without instruments. Their questions revealed a hunger for knowledge that had never been formally cultivated. In the following days, the sniper was asked to step away from his usual rotation and assist in developing a new training structure. The leadership wanted something rigorous, repeatable, and grounded in real combat conditions. He hesitated at first. He was a field operator, not an instructor. Teaching others felt like stepping back from the fight, and part of him still lived for the sharp clarity of the first shot fired in a duel. But he could not ignore what he had seen on the mountain. The enemy's sniper had been skilled, disciplined, and trained with purpose. If they failed to match that level of preparation, the next duel might end very differently, not just for one man, but for an entire squad caught beneath an unseen barrel. So he agreed. The training program he helped build began with fundamentals, range estimation, wind reading, and movement discipline, but it quickly expanded into something more comprehensive. Shooters were drilled in concealment, using terrain rather than vegetation alone. They practiced firing under duress, with cold, numb fingers and irregular breathing, mimicking the conditions of high-altitude engagements. They learned to think not just as shooters, but as hunters, anticipating enemy positions, predicting angles of fire, and turning topography into an ally. He incorporated the tactics the enemy sniper had used against him: long-delay shots, baiting techniques, and exploitation of limited visibility. If the duel had taught him anything, it was that a marksman's deadliest weapon was not his rifle, but his ability to perceive patterns others missed. The training was not without resistance. Some shooters struggled to adapt to the intensity of the drills. Others excelled, revealing natural instincts that had previously gone unnoticed. Over time, the program took shape, not as a rigid course, but as a living system built to evolve with every new engagement, every new lesson learned from the field. Months later, the region's sniper threat declined sharply. Enemy shooters who once dominated ridgelines and passes found themselves outmaneuvered, outreasoned, and outshot by operators trained under the new system. The duel that had nearly ended one man became the foundation for a doctrine that saved dozens. Yet the memory of that cold morning never left him. He could still feel the sting of snow on his face, the weight of the rifle, the tension of waiting for an unseen adversary to make a single mistake. He remembered the flash of the enemy's muzzle, the thin line between survival and death, and the moment he realized the mountain was not just a battlefield but a teacher. He had entered the ridge as a lone marksman. He left it as the architect of a new way of fighting. And though few would ever know the full story, the legacy of that duel lived on, not in medals or citations, but in every shooter who walked into mountains better prepared than he once was, carrying the lessons forged in frost, silence, and the narrow space between two snipers who had seen each other through the crosshairs.